I learned silence has a pulse the night COLE HART stopped the city from breathing. It happened in a room made of glass, walls, ceiling, even the long table polished to a mirror. The city council chamber was designed to look transparent, as if honesty could be engineered through architecture. Light flooded in from every angle, bouncing off microphones and nameplates, off the nervous sheen on reporters' faces. Cameras hummed softly, a mechanical insect choir waiting to feast. I stood at the end of the table with my hands folded and my jaw locked. Invited Negotiator, Independent Territories. That was the title they'd given me, printed neatly on a placard that didn't belong to me. I was an omega in a room that smelled like alpha confidence and recycled air. And I'd learned, long ago, how to hold myself so no one could tell when my pulse tried to escape my throat. Across from me, COLE HART sat perfectly still. He didn't fidget. He didn't tap a pen or shift his weight. He didn't even look bored, which would have been a mercy. He looked present, as if the room existed because he allowed it to, as if the city were a thing that could be cupped in his hands and set down carefully when it misbehaved. "Mr. Riv," he said, when the chair recognized him and the room snapped into attention. His voice was calm, level, unadorned. "You have the floor, the floor." I almost smiled. "Thank you, Director Hart," I said, pitching my tone somewhere between polite and amused. "I'll try not to redecorate." A ripple of restrained laughter passed through the press benches. Cameras angled toward me. I could feel their lenses like heat on my skin. I took a breath and let my gaze travel the room. The council members pretending neutrality, the aides pretending not to text, the journalists pretending not to pick sides. Then I looked back at Cole. "Temporary enhanced control," I said, tasting the words like something expired. That's a lovely phrase. It sounds responsible, comforting, almost kind. Cole didn't react. "But temporary measures have a habit of outliving their promises," I continued.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
And enhanced control. Well, control over whom exactly? Independent territories aren't a variable you can tighten until the graph looks nicer. "Mr. Riv," Cole said, and raised one hand. I stopped. Not because he asked, but because something in the room shifted. The silence didn't just fall, it pressed. I swallowed. The air felt thicker, as if the space between breaths had narrowed. Words lined up in my mouth and stalled, like commuters staring at a closed gate. Cole's eyes were on me now. Gray. Sharp. Not unkind exactly, but precise, like a scalpel considering its options. "Please refrain from speculative language," he said. "The proposal outlines clear parameters. Duration, scope, oversight. Written by your department," I said, and this time the laughter was sharper. "Riskier. Which also defines the emergency." Funny how that works. A councilwoman cleared her throat. Camera zoomed. Cole turned a page on his tablet. The sound was soft. Final. "According to City Statute 14(3), he said, any territory operating within municipal boundaries is subject to temporary oversight during periods of elevated risk. The criteria have been met. The measure is lawful." "Lawful doesn't mean ethical," I shot back. "And it certainly doesn't mean safe." "For whom?" he asked. The question landed like a stone dropped down a well. "For everyone," I said. "You don't pacify a city by squeezing the people who live in its margins. You create pressure. And pressure leads to fracture," he finished. "I'm aware." His gaze held mine, and for a split second, I had the absurd thought that he could hear my heartbeat. That he could feel it, the way the room seemed to feel it. Thudding, stubborn, alive. The silence stretched again. Reporters shifted. Someone coughed. The city waited. "You're very articulate," Cole said at last. "And very confident. But confidence is not a substitute for authority." There it was. Clean. Polite. Surgical. My smile tightened. "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same thing." A murmur ran through the chamber. The council chair tapped her microphone, restoring order, but the damage was done. The duel had drawn blood. Cole leaned back. Just slightly. Enough to signal control without spectacle. "The motion will proceed to vote," he said. "Your objections are noted." Just like that, it was over. The city inhaled again, ragged and uneven. As the council moved on, the pressure eased, but it didn't disappear. It lingered in the glass, in the reflections that doubled and tripled. Us until no one could tell where one person ended and another began. I gathered my papers, though I hadn't brought any. Habit. Armor. When I looked up, Cole was watching me, not with triumph, not with anger, but with something unreadable. As if I'd confirmed a theory he'd already written footnotes for. For the first time that night, unease curled low in my gut. This wasn't just politics. And whatever had learned to breathe in the silence of that room, it was listening now. By the time I reached the press zone, the city had decided who I was supposed to be. Microphones bloomed in front of me like metallic flowers. Cameras flashed, sharp and hungry. Someone called my name with the kind of urgency usually reserved for disasters. Riv. Do independent territories intend to defy the city if the motion passes? Riv. Are you accusing the Department of Control of targeting Omegas? Riv. Do you personally oppose Director Hart? Or is this political theater? I lifted a hand, palm out. The gesture bought me 3 seconds of silence. Thin, brittle seconds, but enough. Let's be clear, I said, pitching my voice so it would carry without rising. Independent territories aren't rejecting cooperation. We're rejecting domination. A reporter with a red tie leaned in. Isn't temporary oversight a reasonable response to elevated risk? Temporary is a word people use when they don't want to promise an end date, I said. A few pens paused. Autonomy isn't chaos, it's accountability at the human scale. When you replace that with total control, you don't get safety, you get fear. Fear of what? Another voice pressed. Of being erased, I said. Of becoming a data point instead of a neighbor. I felt it then. The familiar ache behind my eyes. The low hum of fatigue. That came from translating lived lives into palatable sound bites. I wasn't defending an idea. I was defending people who'd learned to lock their doors quietly and keep their heads down because noise drew attention. Director Hart says the law is on his side, someone said. Laws are written by people, I replied. And people can be wrong. A hand touched my elbow. Soft. Anchoring. Maya, I murmured, not turning. My assistant leaned close, her expression calm but her eyes alert. 2 more questions, she whispered. Then we need to move. I nodded and finished with a practiced smile. We'll continue the conversation where it belongs, at the table, not in a feeding frenzy. That earned a few tight smiles. Maybe a headline or two? As we walked away, Maya kept pace beside me. You were good, she said quietly. Clear. Measured. Translation? I asked. You didn't set anything on fire. Pity, she huffed. You okay? I thought of the chamber. Of the way the silence had pressed, alive and listening. Ask me later. Cole Hart's office was a study in restraint. Gray walls. No art. A desk with clean lines and no photographs. The city spread beneath the windows like a controlled experiment. Roads. Aligned, lights orderly. The illusion of predictability intact. Cole stood at the desk, jacket draped with precision over the chair, sleeves rolled just enough to be human. His tablet displayed cascading reports, risk assessments stacking like dominoes waiting for a push. They're framing this as a loss, said Deputy Director Vaughn, standing a step too close. Loyal. Competent. Nervous in the way people got when the math stopped behaving. It isn't, Cole said. The press doesn't agree. The press confuses noise with impact. Vaughn swallowed. We're also seeing delays. Data requests returned incomplete. A few cross-departmental approvals stalled. Cole's fingers paused over the screen. By whom? Hard to say. It's diffuse. Diffuse was a word people used when they didn't want to say sabotage out loud. Riv? Vaughn ventured. Cole shook his head once. No. No? Riv is visible, Cole said. This isn't. He moved to the window, watching traffic knot and unknot itself below. He'd built the department to anticipate disorder, to narrow the range of possible failures. Chaos was what happened when too many variables were allowed to improvise. Pressure's coming from above, Vaughn said, voice tight. They want results, fast. Cole closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. Fast is how you break things. Sir? Nothing. He straightened. Schedule the next assessment. Quietly. Vaughn nodded, relief flickering. And Riv? Cole considered the name. The way it tasted like a challenge and a warning. Invite him, he said. After hours. By the time I reached my apartment, the adrenaline had burned down to embers. I leaned against the door after it closed, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and coffee grounds. Safe. Temporary. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Director Hart requests a private meeting. Tonight. 11 p.m. Location to follow. I stared at the screen, a laugh pushing up despite myself. Of course, I muttered. Public enemies then. I texted Maya. He wants to talk, she replied instantly. Do not go alone. I never do, I typed, and paused. Deleted it. Sent instead, I'll be careful. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my temples. The city outside hummed, restless. Somewhere between the glass chamber and the quiet of my living room, a thought took shape, unwelcome and insistent. Cole Hart wasn't my opposite. He was my mirror, polished and dangerous. And whatever was tightening its grip on the city knew it. The location arrived 5 minutes before 11. Sublevel B. Conference room 3, no escorts. Of course. I left my phone on the kitchen counter and took the stairs down instead of the elevator. Habit. Paranoia. A little of both. The city at night had a different rhythm, less noise, more intent. Every footstep echoed like it meant something. Sublevel B smelled like metal and disinfectant. The lights were dim by design, not neglect, and the walls absorbed sound the way thick snow did, no bounce, no echo. When I found conference room 3, the door was already unlocked. Inside, there was exactly what had been promised. One table, steel legs, glass top, 2 chairs, 1 recorder, centered with surgical precision. No windows, no screens, no decorative lies. Cole Hart was already there. He stood when I entered, not out of courtesy but calibration, as if measuring the space between us. He'd shed the jacket again, sleeves rolled, collar open 1 notch. Human enough to be disarming. Controlled enough to be dangerous. Mr. Riv, he said. Director Hart. I closed the door behind me and listened to the seal engage. The room became a held breath. I'm flattered. Midnight meetings usually mean secrets or mistakes. Sit, he said. I raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's a suggestion. A corner of his mouth twitched. If I hadn't been watching, I'd have missed it. I sat. The chair was cold. The glass reflected our faces faintly, doubling the tension. Cole didn't sit right away. He reached for the recorder, set it on, and waited. For the record, he said, this conversation is on. Always, I replied. Comforting. He sat then, opposite me, close enough that I could register the warmth of him across the table. Close enough to notice the clean, sharp scent, soap, paper, something mineral beneath it. Alpha, yes, but restrained. Curated. The silence thickened. I felt it in my chest first. A subtle pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks. My thoughts lined up neatly and refused to move. I hated that feeling. Hated how familiar it was. You asked for this, I said lightly, because humor was my armor and I wore it well. If the goal is intimidation, you'll need a bigger table. I didn't ask to intimidate you, Cole said. I asked to understand you. I laughed. It came out sharper than I meant. You chaired a vote that boxed in half the city. That's an interesting way to say hello. His gaze didn't waver. I chair votes to prevent collapse. There it is, I said. The fear. His fingers stilled on the table. Not clenched. Controlled. You think this is about power. I think you confuse control with safety, I shot back. And I think you've never lived under someone else's thumb. That's incorrect, he said quietly. The recorder's tiny red light blinked. We sat there, measuring breaths. Mine sounded too loud in my ears. His were slower, deeper, deliberate. The room listened. I could swear it leaned in. You enjoy the theater, Cole said at last. The public sparring, the applause. I smiled. I enjoy not being erased. By law. By systems, I corrected. By people who say temporary and mean until you stop resisting. He leaned back a fraction, reclaiming space. The pressure eased, just enough to notice. You're protecting people, he said. Not a question. Always. And I'm protecting a city, he said. I tilted my head. Funny. We sound like villains in each other's speeches. Another almost smile. Or allies with terrible timing. That landed. Too close to truth. The silence surged again, sharper this time. I caught a hint of ozone, imagined or not, and my skin prickled. My omega instincts whispered nonsense. Danger, attention, listen. I ignored them. You said there would be no witnesses, I said. So let's stop performing. He nodded once. Agreed. The honesty that followed was like stepping onto ice you didn't know would hold. My initiatives are being undermined, Cole said. Not by you. I kept my face neutral. You're certain? I am. His eyes locked on mine. Which means someone benefits from our conflict. I considered that. The way approval stalled. The way the chamber's silence had pressed like a hand. Someone who feeds on noise, I said slowly. Or the absence of it. He watched me, something like relief cutting through the control. You felt it too. I feel a lot of things, I said. Most of them inconvenient. A huff of breath that might have been a laugh. You're difficult. Occupational hazard. We sat there, two enemies circling a shared suspicion, the recorder humming softly between us. For the first time, the city wasn't between us. Just glass, metal, breath. You don't trust alphas, he said. I don't trust power without consequence. He nodded. Neither do I. That was the most dangerous thing he'd said all night. When I stood to leave, the pressure lifted, like the room had exhaled. The silence receded, sulking. Mr. Riv, Cole said. I paused at the door. Yes, Director? This was useful. I smiled, tired and real. Careful. That almost sounded like respect. His gaze held mine steady. It is. I left with my heart beating too fast, and the uneasy certainty that we'd just crossed a line neither of us could see, but both of us felt. The first outage lasted 11 seconds. That was the number everyone used later. As if precision could make it harmless. It happened just after dawn on the eastern edge, one of the quieter crossings, where the city blurred into independent territory through a mess of warehouses and half-renovated streets. No sirens. No alarms. Just a soft collective pause. Signals dropped. Phones went dead. Traffic lights froze on yellow like they were thinking. And then, everything came back. 11 seconds. Long enough for people to notice. Too short for anyone to explain. By noon, there were 6 more. I watched the map on my tablet as Maya paced the length of my living room, coffee cooling forgotten on the counter. The dots blinked on and off along the perimeter. Uneven and stubborn. Every time a signal vanished, a thin quiet followed. No radio chatter, no data, no ambient noise. As if sound itself had been muted. This isn't a network issue, Maya said. It doesn't follow infrastructure. It follows boundaries. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the screen. Independent boundaries. Yes, she said. And not just ours. She sent the files through. Reports from the south, the river wards, the old factory belt. Patrols stalled. Community lines went dead. People describing the same thing in different words. It went quiet. My voice sounded wrong. I couldn't hear my own footsteps. I thought of the chamber. Of the way the silence had pressed. Attentive. Pressure, I murmured. Maya stopped pacing. What? Nothing. I straightened. Get me timestamps. And see if anyone was speaking when it happened. She frowned. Speaking? Arguing, I clarified. Negotiating, protesting. Her fingers flew. Riv. This is going to sound strange. Try me. In most cases, she said slowly, there was a lull. Meetings paused. Conversation stopped. People went quiet right before the drop. My stomach tightened. So it grows where there's nothing to interrupt it. Silence, I thought, learning to stretch its legs. COLE HART stared at the directive, until the words blurred. Immediate consolidation of boundary oversight. Suspend cross-territory consultations. Implement uniform enforcement protocols. It made no sense. The data didn't support it. The timing was reckless. This will escalate, Vaughn said, standing across the desk, hands clasped too tightly. We'll look like we're provoking them. We will be provoking them, Cole said. He set the tablet down with care. Who signed off? Vaughn hesitated. It came through the Oversight Council. The name sat heavy in the room. They don't handle operational directives, Cole said. They do now. Cole turned to the window. Below, the city moved in patterns he'd spent years learning to predict. The outages showed up as faint gaps in the data stream, blind spots that shouldn't exist. Hold implementation, he said. Vaughn's eyes widened. Sir, I'll take responsibility. Cole's voice was even. Get me raw feeds from the borders, no filters. And Riv? Vaughn asked, cautious. Cole didn't answer right away. He thought of the night meeting. Of the moment when Riv had said you felt it too and been right. Loop him in, Cole said finally. Off the record. The message came an hour later. Short. Unadorned. Seeing the same anomalies. This isn't coincidence. We should talk. I stared at it, pulse ticking in my throat. Trust didn't come easily to me. It had to be earned, chipped out of experience like stone. But the city was doing something new. Something quiet. Agreed, I typed. Borders aren't just lines. The reply was immediate. I know. We met at a neutral site, a transit hub straddling jurisdiction, empty at this hour. The air smelled of oil and rain. When Cole arrived, he looked strained. The control was there, but thinner, stretched over worry like ice over moving water. Independent territories are reporting pressure, I said without preamble. Not force, pressure. He nodded. City systems are experiencing blind spots. Orders are coming down that contradict risk models. Someone wants us reactive, I said. Or silent, he replied. The words settled between us. I closed my eyes for a second and felt it. The hum beneath the concrete, the way sound seemed to pool and thin. These borders were never just legal, I said. They're old, layered, marked. Magical, he said, not mocking. Anchored, I corrected. They respond to attention, to speech, to conflict. And to the absence of it, he said. We stood there, two men from opposite sides of a line that was learning to move, the trust between us fragile and necessary. Whatever this is, Cole said, it benefits from our division. I met his gaze. Then we stopped giving it that. Outside the city breathed, uneven, uncertain. And somewhere along its edges the silence listened, waiting to see if we would speak. The second night meeting wasn't scheduled through messages. It happened because we both stopped pretending this was coincidence. The room was different this time, deeper underground, further from anything that could pretend to be neutral. Concrete walls. A single strip of light humming overhead. The same recorder on the table, but it felt smaller now, inadequate for what we were about to put into the air. Cole was already there. Again. This time. He looked tired. Not the polished, weaponized exhaustion he wore in public, but the real thing, the kind that settled into the shoulders and stayed. His jacket was gone. His tie, too. Control still wrapped him like a second skin. But there were cracks now. Hairline fractures. I dropped my tablet onto the table, harder than necessary. Tell me you're seeing this, I said. He didn't flinch. Just slid his own device forward. The screens lit up side by side, reflections overlapping, city grids, boundary markers, timestamps stacked in tight columns. I am, he said. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The recorder blinked. The silence thickened, curious. I broke it. They're synchronized, I said, voice sharp with anger. Outages, pressure spikes, compliance delays. It all lines up with our public clashes. Every time we escalate, the borders destabilize, Cole finished. And someone intervenes. My jaw tightened. Not intervenes. Harvests. That earned his full attention. I tapped the screen, pulling up a layered map, old data, newer overlays, faint symbols most people dismissed as noise. Independent territories keep records, the city doesn't, I said. Not because we're paranoid. Because we've learned what gets erased. I zoomed in on the perimeter. The borders weren't lines. They were knots. These markers, I said. They predate the city. Some of them predate writing. Boundaries reinforced with ritual, with agreement, with attention. Cole's gaze darkened. And conflict. And silence, I said. My voice shook despite my effort. They grow strongest when people stop talking. When fear makes everyone careful. When no one challenges the shape of the line. I leaned back, anger rising hot and bitter. They used us. The words tasted like rust. They let me play the disruptive Omega, I went on, heat bleeding through the restraint. Let you play the iron-handed Alpha. We make noise, we polarize. And while everyone's watching us, the structure tightens, Cole said. His hand closed slowly on the edge of the table. Not a fist. Not violence. Just containment. I've spent my career preventing collapse, he said. Building redundancies. Eliminating blind spots. His voice was steady, but there was something sharp underneath now. And I never saw this. You weren't supposed to, I said. They don't want someone like you noticing. You ask too many questions. A muscle jumped in his jaw. So do you. For a heartbeat, the anger shifted, turned, sharpened, focused. I felt it then. Not just pressure, but resistance. The silence in the room pulling back, like it didn't like where this was going. What is it? Cole asked quietly. A structure, I said. Not a person, not a department. Something that lives in the margins between jurisdictions. It enforces borders by feeding on instability. And we're the generators, he said flatly. I laughed once, harsh and humorless. Congratulations, we're excellent at our jobs. The recorder hummed. The light flickered. Cole exhaled slowly, deliberately. When he spoke again, the mask was gone. Not slipped, removed. I was wrong about you, he said. I blinked. Careful. That almost sounds like an apology. It's an admission, he replied. I thought you were accelerating disorder. And I thought you were addicted to control, I shot back. Then, softer, turns out we're both reacting to the same fear. The city tearing itself apart, he said. People losing their voices, I said. The silence recoiled. For the first time since this began, I felt something shift, not in the room, but between us. The lines that had kept us cleanly opposed blurred, then redrew themselves. Not enemies. Not allies. Something more dangerous. We can't fight this separately, Cole said. It adapts, redirects, divides. I stared at the maps, at the way the borders pulsed faintly when our data synced. It's built to survive opposition, I said. But not cooperation. His eyes met mine. You're suggesting we stop playing our roles, I said. No more public sparring. No more predictable outrage. And in private? He asked. I smiled, slow and sharp. In private, we dismantle it. The silence surged, panicked now. The lights dimmed a fraction. Cole leaned forward. Not into my space, but into the shared one we'd created over the table. Then this is a joint operation, he said. The words landed with weight. I nodded once. It was a small word. It felt like a breach. Somewhere above us, the city shifted, unsettled. And deep in the borders that had learned to feed on our division, something stirred, aware for the first time that it had been seen. Working together meant learning each other's rhythms. It meant nights. Not the performative kind, the ones with statements and cameras, but the hours when the city thinned out and the borders grew restless. We met in borrowed spaces and forgotten rooms, a closed archive beneath City Hall, a transit control booth taken. Off rotation, once even my living room with the lights off and the windows cracked open to let the city breathe. We spoke in low voices, not because we were afraid of being overheard, though we were, but because raising them felt unwise. The silence had learned our habits. We didn't want to teach it new ones. Cole stood at my kitchen counter, sleeves rolled, studying a projection that hovered like a ghost above the surface. Lines shimmered faintly where boundaries should have been solid. You see that? I asked. He nodded. It reacts when you speak. I do tend to have that effect. A corner of his mouth lifted. You deflect when you're tired. I deflect when I'm awake. He glanced at me then, not long, not invasive. Observant. I hated how accurately he saw me. I hated how much I wanted him to keep looking. We worked through the night, trading data and hypotheses, fitting pieces together that had never been meant to meet. Every time we aligned, every time city metrics and independent records overlapped, the borders flickered, unsettled. Cooperation destabilizes it, Cole said. Mutual understanding, I corrected. Cooperation implies consent. Point taken. He paused. You don't trust easily, I snorted. You chair a department that can rewrite my life with a memo. And yet, he said, you're here. I leaned back against the table, folding my arms. Don't mistake necessity for trust. Then what is it? The question hovered between us, delicate as a held breath. I opened my mouth, closed it again. The silence leaned in, curious. Strategy, I said finally. He smiled. This time, it reached his eyes. Between bursts of work, we talked, not about policy, about things that slipped through cracks. He told me he grew up on the edge of the city, where rules changed depending on who was watching. I told him about the first time I learned to negotiate, not with words, but with stillness. We laughed quietly, at the absurdity of how similar those lessons sounded. At least you got a badge out of it, I said. And you got a reputation, he replied. Dangerous. Careful, I said. I'll start thinking you admire me. I do, he said, without hesitation. The admission landed softly, and hit hard. There were moments when the work brought us too close. When we stood shoulder to shoulder over a screen, our breaths sinking without permission. When his hand hovered near mine, never touching, as if contact might trigger something we weren't ready to name. Alpha, Omega. The labels hummed beneath everything, a low voltage. He never pushed, never claimed space that wasn't offered. But his presence reshaped the room, subtle shifts in air, in gravity. I felt it in my chest, the way my instincts argued with my mind. Danger, they whispered. Attention. Careful. I met his gaze across the table and held it, not a challenge, not an invitation, an acknowledgement. Too close? He asked quietly. Too close, I agreed. Neither of us moved away. The silence stirred, uneasy now. It didn't like this. Didn't like the way our words threaded together, filling gaps it had learned to exploit. When we spoke, it retreated. When we laughed, soft, shared, it thinned to nothing. Near dawn, exhaustion crept in. Real, bone deep. You should rest, Cole said, rubbing his eyes. You're shaking. Occupational hazard, I said, then sighed. You're not wrong. He hesitated, then set a mug in front of me. Coffee. Black. Just how I took it. I hadn't told him that. Thank you, I said, quieter. He nodded. We can't afford mistakes. There it was again. The edge. The fear of losing control. I wrapped my hands around the mug, felt the warmth steady me. Control isn't the same as certainty, I said. Sometimes you have to trust the process. His gaze softened. You make it sound easy. It isn't, I said. It's terrifying. For a moment, we let that be true. When he finally left, the apartment felt larger and emptier. I stood by the window, watching the city stretch awake, borders holding, barely. We were changing something. Together. And that, I realized with a mix of dread and exhilaration, was the most dangerous part of all. The border woke before the city did. I felt it before I saw it. The pressure, low and humming, like a held note vibrating through bone. The line that cut the city from the independent wards shimmered in, the early light, not visible to the eye so much as to the instinct. The air there behaved differently. Sound thinned. Words hesitated. Cole stood beside me, coat collar turned up against a wind that didn't touch the streets behind us. Ahead, the boundary markers, old stone, newer steel, formed a loose arc where jurisdictions argued quietly with each other. This is where it's strongest, he said. This is where it learned, I replied. People gathered anyway. They always did when something felt wrong. Reporters, residents, patrol units keeping a careful distance. Cameras rolled. Microphones hovered. The Oversight Council had sent observers who pretended not to be here to watch. The silence pressed. It wasn't empty. It was crowded, packed with all the things people hadn't said out loud, fears, assumptions, convenient half-truths. It fed on that weight, growing dense and heavy until even breathing felt like a negotiation. I stepped forward. The quiet surged, trying to swallow the sound of my boots on concrete. My throat tightened. For a heartbeat, my voice stalled behind my teeth, trapped. Then Cole spoke. City residents, he said. Voice steady, carrying farther than it should have. Independent wards. This boundary exists to protect, not to suffocate. The pressure wavered. I glanced at him, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. He was afraid. Not of me, not of the crowd, of letting go. I took another step, aligning myself with him. Not opposite, not behind. They've told us this conflict was inevitable, I said, projecting without shouting. That control and autonomy can't coexist. That one must dominate the other. A ripple ran through the gathered crowd. Murmurs tried to form and died in the thick air. That was a lie, Cole said. The silence recoiled, sharp and sudden. A few people gasped, startled by the sound of their own breath returning. I felt it then. The structure. Not a thing with edges, but a presence braided through the line itself. Old. Patient. It tugged at the quiet, trying to clamp down again. They needed us divided, I said. Needed us loud in public and silent in truth. Because when we argue the way they expect, the borders tighten. I looked at the cameras. At the observers. At the people who'd learned to listen for what wasn't being said. So we're changing the rules. Cole turned slightly toward me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him through the air. When he spoke again, he didn't look at the crowd. They taught me that order comes from control, he said. That chaos follows conversation. The silence surged, angry now. They were wrong, he continued. Chaos follows fear. And fear thrives in quiet. I felt the structure strain, pulling the sound down, trying to choke it. My chest ached. My instincts screamed to retreat, to let the line do what it had always done. Instead, I spoke. Autonomy isn't rebellion, I said. It's participation. And control without consent isn't safety, it's erasure. The words cut through. Not loud. Clear. The silence fractured. It didn't shatter all at once. It cracked. Hairline breaks racing along the boundary like lightning through glass. Sound rushed in. Wind, voices, the scrape of boots, a laugh startled out of someone's throat. The structure writhed. Desperate. It tried to pull us back into familiar roles. I felt it tug at me, at my anger, my instinct to bite back. To perform the clever omega with sharp edges. I didn't. Cole felt it too. I saw it in the way his shoulders squared. In the way he resisted the urge to command. Together, we refused. This isn't a takeover, Cole said, raising his voice only enough to be heard. It's a recalibration. Joint oversight, shared authority. And shared accountability, I added. Out loud. The silence screamed. No sound, just pressure. And then collapsed in on itself, starved by the truth it couldn't digest. The boundary flared once, bright and unstable. Then it loosened. The line softened, no longer a choke point but a threshold. The air warmed. Sound settled back into its proper places. Someone clapped, hesitant at first. Then another. Then a dozen more, the noise tentative but growing. I exhaled, shaking. My knees felt weak, like I'd run too far on adrenaline alone. Cole reached for my elbow. Not possessive, not protective. Steadying. You okay? He asked, low. I laughed, breathless and real. Ask me later. The observers were already talking into comms, scrambling to rewrite narratives that no longer fit. The cameras caught everything, caught us standing side by side, caught the border breathing again. For a moment, the risk hit me full force. We'd put everything on the line, careers, reputations, the fragile peace we'd been accused of endangering. And it had worked. The structure was gone, or weakened enough to matter. The silence, stripped of its power, drifted away like fog burned off by morning. Cole let go of my elbow. Our eyes met. No performance. No roles. We did it, he said. We started it, I corrected. The rest will be messy. His mouth curved. I can handle messy. I believed him. As the city found its voice again, loud and imperfect and alive, I realized something with a jolt of wonder and fear. Breaking the silence hadn't just freed the borders. It had changed us. The city didn't change overnight. Anyone who told you that revolutions were clean had never watched committees argue at 3 in the morning, or seen laws rewritten by people who were afraid of getting it wrong. What changed first wasn't the borders or the paperwork. It was the sound. The city grew louder, messier, alive in ways it hadn't been in years. Not the panic noise of fear, but the layered hum of disagreement, laughter, traffic, music leaking from open windows. The kind of noise that meant people were still talking. The borders followed. They were recognized. Not erased, not conquered, but acknowledged for what they were. Thresholds. Places of exchange, instead of choke points. Joint oversight councils formed, staffed by city officials and independent delegates who'd spent years pretending not to know each other's names. I sat in one of those meetings with a paper cup of bad coffee and a stack of documents that refused to stay neatly aligned. Page 12 contradicts page 9, I said. Cole, seated across from me, didn't look up. That's because page 9 was written by someone who thought control was clarity. I snorted. You're learning. He glanced up then, eyebrow raised. You're a bad influence. Occupational hazard. The coalition agreement took weeks. Concessions made loudly in public and carefully in private. There were moments it nearly fell apart, old resentments flaring, familiar roles trying to reassert themselves. Each time, we chose differently. Not perfectly. Not without friction. But consciously. You're aware, one council member said during a particularly tense session, that this alliance makes you both extremely dangerous. Cole folded his hands on the table. Calm. Measured. Yes. I smiled, just enough. That's the point. Dangerous meant unpredictable. It meant the structure that had fed on silence had no clean edges to grip anymore. It meant power had to be negotiated, instead of assumed. After the meeting we stood in the corridor outside, glass walls, sunlight pouring in, the city visible and complicated beyond them. You could have stayed safe, Cole said. Kept your distance. I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. You could have tightened control, and called it order. He nodded. We both chose risk. Funny, I said. I used to think risk was something done to me. And now it's a decision. He considered that, then smiled, a real one, unguarded. You make a compelling case. Our relationship, if that's what it was, didn't come with clean lines either. There were no dramatic declarations, no promises carved into stone. Just late nights that bled into early mornings, shared meals eaten over documents, and conversations that wandered from policy to memories without warning. Once, exhausted, I fell asleep on the couch in his office, woke to a blanket draped over me and a note in precise handwriting. Meeting ran late. Try not to dismantle the city without me. I sent back a message later. No guarantees. We learned each other's silences. Mine, when I needed space. His, when he was thinking too hard and forgetting to breathe. Silence wasn't a weapon between us anymore. It was a pause we chose, together. One evening, months later, we stood near the old boundary line as the sun dipped low. People crossed freely now, some hesitant, some bold. The markers remained, softened by time and use. Do you ever miss it? He asked. The certainty? I laughed softly. I missed the simplicity, not the cost. He nodded. Me neither. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. The space between us was no longer something to conquer or control. It simply existed, honest and alive. The city breathed around us, loud and imperfect. And for the first time, the quiet that followed wasn't hungry. It was chosen.